Welcome everyone to Vodcast Underground episode 2. We made it past one episode. I wasn't sure if it was actually going to happen, but it looks like we did. This is John with John's Record Rack. I'm located in Denver, Colorado. And again, I have with me my co-host, Mr. Corey Johnson. Corey?
Hey guys, Corey here from the channel Just Add Vinyl. And here in Columbus, Ohio, I've been kind of hiding out and staying in the air conditioning as it's been a pretty warm summer here, as I know it is for a lot of folks in the country. How's the weather out there in Denver?
It's actually been extremely hot. It was funny. The last time we did this episode, I think I mentioned it was like in the mid-40s or something like that, and it was, mid-June, so it was super cold. Not characteristic of this time of year in June, but that is in the distant past, and it has been extremely hot, that high desert heat, but it's dry. So it's better than being, 100 degrees and 100% humidity. So, but I'll tell you what, man, I'm ready for fall. Fall's my favorite season. So I'm ready to put summer behind and get into cooler weather.
Absolutely.
So I figured before we start in on our next episode, we can maybe go through some of the comments that we received from episode 1 on the Universal Fire.
Yeah, and I mean, oh my gosh, John, we got you got a ton of comments on this. I printed off a page here, and I don't know if we'll be able to touch on every single one of them, but I'll give it a good effort. Great, a lot of views, a lot of interest, a lot of folks engaging in this. Start off with Das Hog, left a comment that his channel was previously called Kevy Metal. So he was in the vinyl community for a while, checked out for a long time, and then seems to be coming back. So that's really cool to have Kevin come back. But he said the first and last episode of Vodcast Underground, and I was there to see it. Great show, gentlemen.
He was almost correct.
He was almost correct. So we did manage to come back. We just didn't want to overpromise and underdeliver, which right. I may be doing that right now. Rob Boston, excellent stuff, guys. Super intro to the VU series. Skip X. So Skip, I'm just going to summarize because he came out on and went and really engaged and had a lot of questions that we had, and he had a friend who was an attorney and asked him some questions. So Skip X, I'm going to just summarize a lot of his comments. But he says that in most instances regarding the ownership of the masters, artist is pretty much out of luck. But in light of all the hiding, covering up, ducking artists' inquiries, collecting insurance proceeds without addressing the artist's losses, et cetera, his friend who's in legal counsel says that could be enough to leverage a case. He said it really is, let's see, he really says it all with the final note that his friend would rather be representing the artist instead of Universal. So I think that says a lot right there. China Ditch Records says, awesome. Thanks for sharing. Looking forward to the next episode. Comment from here, from you. Looks like you're addressing the thumbs down. There's always got that one thumbs down for most of the.
I figured we'd have more than that. I mean, I've gotten multiple thumbs down in some of my other videos, but I figured people just like to do that. But we had one, so I thought it has to be Universal Music, right? Because we're that important that they're watching this.
Right? And then Naaman says, congratulations to you both for a cool idea on a podcast. He'll be back for another, for this episode too. So that's cool. Thanks, Naaman, for that. And then Baraka Dub says, Paul, nice job. I had a commenter ping me about my channel about this, and he had heard about it years ago, but didn't realize the extent of what was lost or being leaked out. He's been out of the country for the past few weeks, so he totally missed the article. Tractor Countdown, that's Ian, our friend from across the pond. He says, nice job, John and Corey, and don't forget Doug Edwards, too. He said, the story's not going away. It's on the BBC News here in the UK. Cheers. And then, so Megaside 842 engaged with some questions that I think Skip X may have answered, so check that out. Autumn Aurelian says the leak. So she's talking about when I touched on the another tragedy that had happened that was unrelated but still in the same subject line. That she was talking about the leak on the East Coast was affected by the Polygram and Motown stuff. said that the tapes had to be freeze dried to the tune of over $10 million.
That was the late 70s one, right?
That's right. Yep. And then, so that was expensive. So thanks for the comment there, Autumn. Local bandography. I feel like the misrepresented product should have been pulled from the shelves, although I doubt it will happen. So he's talking about the, all the original master from the original master tape. So we know a lot of those may not be true because it was released after 2008. Hello. Vinyl 79, Rob just comments how, our sentiments are exactly sad, real sad, irresponsible. It's sickening, actually, and that's pretty much how we felt. And then the final comment was from Vinyl Ridge. He was concerned that the Beatles masters may have been involved. I know you commented, I know you replied back to everybody on this. You didn't think the Beatles were, but it looks like Rich dug up that at the Universal had released something on Beatles. But and I think it kind of, like the Beatles and the big band, the Nirvanas, we kind of touched on that where they've been reissued and remastered and are available.
Right.
But the tragedy is the obscure artists we're never going to discover, or the artists that are going back to pull those masters out, especially a lot of the 90s artists to put stuff out on vinyl that was never released. We're going to miss out on all that. But absolutely awesome comments, and I appreciate everybody commenting and engaging in that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was really pleased. This is what I was hoping for, was that people would, not just say, great episode, loved it. That type of stuff's great too, but pretty much everybody had their own opinion on, or their own thoughts on the tragedy itself, which I thought was great. Real quick on Vinyl Richie's comment, the Beatles masters, I think, and I don't have it in front of me, but I think he said that, was it Sgt. Pepper's, that 50th anniversary reissue was Universal Music. Obviously that was done from the master tapes, but it was done in 2017 or 2018. So we know that those are safe. We know that the Beatles master tapes are safe. And if I'm not mistaken, Paul McCartney now owns all of those. He bought them back from the Michael Jackson estate. Was maybe after he died or right before? I don't know. So, yeah, but I think more importantly, the Impulse masters, the Chess Records masters, that's the stuff that, some of that stuff we probably never heard and will never hear because it's gone forever. Allegedly.
Yeah, that'll be ongoing. So I'll just be keeping my ear to the news on that. And if anything more develops, it'll be interesting to see what kind of lawsuits and things like that unfold.
Yep, absolutely. Well, let's move on to the topic for episode 2. And Corey, I'll let you introduce this topic.
All right. So yeah, what are we getting into this time? So we really wanted to talk about kind of where we got started with record collecting. So I guess, have you come up with the title for this, John? We haven't come up with a title yet, have we?
No, I don't think we have. We will have a title by the time this hits YouTube.
There you go. So we have a working title. It's it's Vodcast episode number 2. But so we wanted to get into talking about record collecting, and finally a subject where I can almost be an expert on, right? So we want to talk about record collecting and talking about what's changed. So I've been doing this for about 7-8 years. I wanted to talk both, and then both of us have different experiences, and talk about what got us started into record collecting, what kind of challenges did we face with record collecting and equipment and things like that, and then what's changed? What have we learned? What are we doing differently today that we weren't doing for me 7-8 years ago? So hopefully people that are new to collecting can come in and learn a little bit. People that have collected a while can chime in and say, yeah, I had a similar direction, or I zigged when you zagged. And maybe somebody with more experience than I or you can give us some advice for the future. So kind of wanted to get into that today.
Yeah, and I think, when you first brought this to me, this topic as an idea for an episode, it was, yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good that we did this right away, because at the end of the day, this is the reason that we're here on doing this. At least for me, I'm doing this on YouTube. I never would have thought of doing anything like this, right? Because I've been a collector long before I got involved with YouTube, long before YouTube existed. So I think to get this out here as an episode to, you know, spark dialogue and discussion is will be good. So great topic. This really could have even been our first topic too.
Yeah, good point. So John, yeah, I'll throw the first question at you. Please explain that that collection that's sitting there behind you, the monolith of records there. So what got you into music and collecting records? Where did it all start for you?
So for me, and I'll start, you know, kind of at the beginning, music has always been in my life from my earliest memories and earliest photos of me, where I don't have memories, but I have memories because I've seen photos, are of me sitting in front of a turntable. Like I had this little, I remember those little Fisher-Price plastic turntables that came out in the late 70s, early 80s that had speakers that came with it. But I had photos of me, you know, sitting Indian style, cross-legged with, I don't even remember the record it was. I think it was something like The Hobbit, you know, books on tape type of thing. But it was The Hobbit, just me sitting there staring into the, you know, the jacket with all the Hobbit stuff and kind of reading through it. But yeah, I mean, music has always been around. My dad is a big music guy. He is, he's always had a large, I guess, palette of music from, you know, rock and hard rock to country and jazz, and even a time when he was into classical. So it's always been around. I remember going to the grocery store and buying 45s, the little square 40, like flimsy, look like floppy disks, but they were square and I could stick them on my table. And I think one of the earliest ones I remember buying with my own money was Beach Boys, Kokomo. Like mid 80s. Because all the records I had, you know, previous to that were, you know, my parents or somebody else bought them for me. But the very first LP I bought with my own money, and I still have it, was The Police, Zenyatta Mandata.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So once, you know, the 80s transitioned into the 90s, of course, I was also buying tapes and listening to tapes at that time because it was just a lot easier, more convenient. And then, of course, CDs came later. I didn't get a CD player until like 92, which is late, right? I mean, by that point, everybody was buying CDs. CDs was the number one format. And for whatever reason, I didn't have CDs. And then I think my first CD was maybe the Black Album, even though I already had the tape. So I guess I wouldn't call myself a quote-unquote record collector then, because I wasn't thinking in terms of a collector, even though I had records and I would listen to them from time to time. I don't really think I became aware of the thing, you know, that I knew that there was people out there who collected records until maybe my junior or senior year of high school in the mid-90s. And that's when I started.
That's a good time to start.
Buying records. Yeah, and there's records I remember seeing. Like, you know, I see the record, I see the CD, I see the tape. I'm just going to grab the tape for the car because I didn't have a CD player in my car yet, and I'll just grab the CD for the home stereo. I mean, we're talking records like Tom Petty, Wildflowers. I remember passing on that. I got it a couple of years later in a bargain bin, so I was lucky. But like Metallica Black Album, I specifically remember holding the record, the vinyl, and looking at it and then putting it back and grabbing the long box CD. So, which
probably cost more. Weren't CDs like $21.99?
Yeah, I spent my entire budget on the CD and the tape because, you know, I wanted the tape for the car. Because I think car CD players at that time, I don't think they existed in the early 90s. But by the time you got to the mid 90s, they were, you know, like $400 or whatever. $400 back then would be like dropping $1,000 today.
Yeah. Well, I did the so I had jumping ahead. So you said the early 90s. I had a Sony Discman. CD player, and I would keep that on my leg while my friend drove and plug it in through the cassette, and then that's how we played our CDs in the car.
So it didn't skip. Did it have the anti-skip that just didn't do anything?
It was one of the early ones. I think it had 8. I think it has 4 or 8 oversampling. If I remember right, it was one of the early Discman. I think I bought it in 1990 or 91. It was about the time that Achtung Baby, U2's Achtung Baby came out. So that was one of the early CDs that I bought after I got the Discman, because before that it was all BMG stuff. But we're kind of skipping ahead a little bit. So you brought us up to about 96.
Yeah. About 96 when I started collecting, when I started thinking of it in that terms, like, oh, wow, there's a bunch of collectors out there, people who are buying records, and you started seeing used records, in record stores, the ones that existed. Or you would see, like the Tower Records that was here in Denver, they had basically all their records pulled off, and they were in a small little bin of, like, everything was on sale. They're just trying to get rid of their overstock. Yeah. And that's where I got Wildflowers, and that's where I got She's the One, the Tom Petty sound.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, both of those.
Wow. Yeah, those are absolute grails.
$10.
Yeah, so I guess so my story is very similar. I would go all the way back to the beginning. I'd say music is in my DNA. I don't know, I'm in my 40s, and mom and dad moved just a few years ago, and they downsized and moved as they're getting a little bit older. They're in their early 70s now. Mom gave me a bunch of stuff I had when I was a kid, and I was going through my baby book of all things, and I look in there and it said, blah, 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 Corey likes to listen to soft music, blah, 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 on the radio. So right there from the beginning, DNA, I loved to listen to music as a kid. And I remember growing up and doing the same thing as you, having the Fisher-Price record player. I had a plastic one. It was like 1 unit. A lot of people have memories like that, but it was setting out all the little 45s and listening to the kids' stories. And like you said, the flexi disc, I think I have 1 or 2 of those. Hand-me-down records for my brothers. The Disney, all the Disney stories. And I had a couple picture discs from like Fox and the Hound and Lady and the Tramp. And I still have some of those today, but just love listening to the records and switching them out. I remember listening to, my mom had like a box of 45, so C.W. McCall's Convoy was really cool, because I like the not the walkie-talkies, but the CB radio jargon and all that.
Oh, yeah.
It was huge in the late 70s, so I had that. I remember Johnny Horton and those kind of records. So it was really fun to listen to all that and buy those stories on tape and as a kid, and collecting Matchbox cars, and I won't go down that rabbit hole. But we moved about 85. So all that, mom sold all the 45s in a garage sale for a couple of bucks. All the stereos, all the records, all got boxed up, and we moved. So that was, cassettes were my life after that. And then once in a while I would get out the turntable and set it up, and like a rainy Saturday afternoon, get in there, go to the back part of the basement, set some of this stuff up. I remember listening to my parents' Queen record, like the Queen's debut. I remember listening to the concert for Bangladesh, and I really liked the song My Guitar Gently Weeps, and I would find it and play it, and then kind of put that away. And when I got a little bit older, it was hooking the CD player up through the vintage amplifier and running the CD player through that. And so, yeah, just always kind of liked, but it was cassettes. And I remember keeping like a stack of 45s over at my friend's house. But, yeah, I mean, I never really thought about it. It was cassettes and it was CDs, but I always had a stack around. I'd go to my brother's house. So this is like maybe 87, 88. I go to my brother's house, visit with my parents. I go to the basement. I'd turn on MTV and watch, Poison, Bon Jovi, watch all of that kind of stuff. But he had dad's old turntable and stereo.
Right.
So I would go ahead and I would put on, he had Guns N' Roses. I would listen to that. I would listen to Woodstock. He had the Woodstock LP, Volume 1 or Volume 2, play Jimi Hendrix doing the Star Spangled Banner or whatnot. And and then I ended up getting those records later. So I got married in 94. And when we were on a honeymoon in Niagara Falls, we actually went to a record shop in Canada, and I picked up a short stack of records. It was like Motley Crue, Cinderella, Quiet Riot. And I just kind of always had those under my bed. And once in a while, friends would be over. Huh?
Is it in, you said you got those in Canada?
In Canada. I still have my Cinderella Canadian pressing. The other ones were left at a friend's house because I would take them and we would, have parties, and for fun we would play old records, I guess. And then I'll give this back to you. I've been talking for a while. So it was like 2004 or so, I think. I went to Florida with my family, and we went to St. Pete's, and there was a record store there. And that record store, music memorabilia shop. So you walk through this shop. It was on the pier, St. Pete's Pier. I think it's under construction right now. But it was a really cool memorabilia shop. They had autographs, famous, baseball players, and autographs and pictures. And one of the things they had was framed records. And I was like, honey, look at this. This is awesome. I found Dark Side of the Moon, and it had the sleeve with the record in the same, trapped there in the frame. And I was like, we've got to get this. And I bought that, brought it home, and that ended up being the basis for me buying and collecting and growing and doing a music room.
Right. Wow. Yeah, I mean, I always had, everywhere I lived, even when I lived in, roommates in the city in small apartments, I always had a stereo. I always had a turntable. I didn't always have a working one. I remember when I got my dad's old Techniques, it needed a new bell. Of course, at that time, I didn't really know anything about fixing turntables and the, inner workings of a turntable. So I just had it. But I had one of those, 350 discs carousel CD.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Big stereo. I still have it. In fact, it's still plugged in. if I
work?
Yeah, that's what I use. But yeah, every place I lived, I always had, a modest stereo, a receiver, speakers, and a CD player. I always had that. Even when, iTunes and that kind of stuff first appeared in 2004, 3, I always had a stereo. I never gravitated towards getting all my music through, a little iPod or an MP3 file, or listening through computer speakers. I never did that. And it wasn't because, I'm trying to be cool and I think that people who listen to digital files, don't know anything. It wasn't like that at all. For me personally, I didn't like it. I didn't like listening. It sounded like I was, listening through to digital music. I mean, everybody knows what poor quality digital music sounds like coming out of tiny little computer speakers. That never appealed to me. I always wanted a huge stereo system, right? Or modest, depending on the size of my apartment, but something that I could turn up and get quality sound. I always wanted that. And so, I don't know, probably around 2005, when I started the career that I'm in now, because even though records were cheap back then, you gotta be able to have some kind of money to go out and buy all this stuff all the time. So I'd say between 96 and 2004, 2005, I still bought records, but it wasn't like it is now, right? I would buy records here and there, but I wouldn't necessarily go digging all the time. It was I'd go to record shows, big record shows, and that's where I'd get the majority of my records. But it wasn't a daily or weekly thing. And I just didn't have a lot of money. I moved every year. You know what it's like. I'm sure everybody out there who has a record collection of at least a couple hundred records knows what it's like to move vinyl records from place to place. It sucks. I mean, it's back-breaking work, and especially when you have thousands of records, which, shoot me now. If we decide to move, I don't know what I'm going to do.
I've never moved with this many records, so I've been reading up on what kind of boxes to get, because we're looking at moving. Looking at moving, so I was looking at some different boxes, reading some online forums about that. So I've got 2,000 records to move, so that's not going to be fun.
Right. So between 96 and 2004, yes, I collected records, but it wasn't like what it became, what it is now. And then I remember I walked into which is one of it still exists today. It's called Black and Red, and it's in Arvada, Colorado. Great store. But I walked in there, and I actually walked in there to buy a CD that came out. I think it was Elephant by the White Stripes. I went in there to buy the new CD, and there was, of course, they always had records and stuff. And I just, for whatever reason, I started browsing through, and I remember seeing Led Zeppelin, House of the Holy, original copy. I mean, mint condition. And it was like $4. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, $4 for this record? I mean, it was new. It was 8, right? So I was like, I'm going to buy this. So I bought that record. And then I started, anytime I went into a store, I would look at classic rock records. And they would have, $2, $3, $4, which these records that we just mentioned, you mentioned Dark Side of the Moon, they're not going to be less than, depending on their condition, they're not going to be less than $20. I mean, Dark Side of the Moon with all of the inner stuff and stickers and the poster, that's a $35 record, right? Yep. Depending on the condition. So I just started buying this, and then as the years went by, I started to notice Houses of the Holy, $10. Houses of the Holy, $15. $20, $25. So I just started trying to buy up as much stuff as I could. And then Record Store Day came into being, which I think was in 2008. Is that right? 2009.
Oh, was it that early?
Yeah, they had the 10-year anniversary.
Sounds about right.
Last year.
Okay.
I think it was 2008. But I remember I walked into a store, Twist and Shout in Denver, and I knew nothing about Record Store Day. And at that time, it wasn't huge. I walked in and they had a little table with some cake, looked like birthday cake, and like a little box wine thing. And they were just handing out like tiny little plastic cups of the box wine and cake. They're like, Happy Record Store Day. And I'm like,
it's like communion-sized cups or something.
Yeah, pretty much. And I'm like, yay, Happy Record Store Day. I'm like, what? Record Store Day. And then the following year, I started hearing, advertisements about it. And I remember going down there because I remember getting a couple things that had been released in 2008. There wasn't a whole lot of stuff, but I remember seeing stuff that had the sticker on it. And then I remember going the next year, and the line was like across the street to try to get in. And I'm like, what? This is huge. And then, of course, year after year after year after year, it's a worldwide phenomenon now. But I really, really started to ramp up my collecting when I stopped moving as much, which would have been mid-2000s, 2005-ish. And when I had a real job, so I had a little bit more cash flow, so I didn't have to worry about paying rent or buying records. So, and then of course, what it is today, I mean, it's completely different hobby, I think, for any of us who started early on today, right? Sometimes it can even take over your life. I know it has for me at times, and I have to kind of step back and say, why am I doing this?
Yeah, just like any obsession, right? Or anything you get interested in, it can go too far, or it can consume, everything you do, or it can take every dollar. Absolutely, it doesn't matter if it's cars, motorcycles, music, just fishing, whatever you're into. You just have to prioritize and balance. If not, things can get out of whack and cost you, or have some negative impacts in your life for sure.
Yeah, it takes over your life. I mean, there's been times where I remember feeling like, I don't want to say depressed, but just like I'm burnt out. Like I don't want to listen to anything, not even sound, right? Because it's like, I got to go through these records, and I got to go through these, and did I get this record? Did I get that record? And then a month goes by, and you have like 30 records that you haven't even opened. It's like, okay, why am I doing this? Am I just doing this to collect stuff? Or do I really like this music, right? Am I really going to listen to this music? So then I've taken time.
Yeah, so let me ask you to back up a little bit, because when I first started collecting, it was, 2004 to 2011, I really didn't do a lot. But I was interested, and I sold some records on eBay for my friend McBride. He had a large record collection. I went and hung out at his house. I saw records I didn't know about. I started learning about Italian prog, and he started giving me an education and became my music mentor, and still is.
Yeah.
But he gave me some really rare records, and I was looking them up, and he gave me his. I traded a head unit CD player and I installed it for him, and he gave me his 80s JVC record player, his turntable, and I hooked that up, and I was listening to some music, and then I sold some records on eBay for him. I'm talking. He had the Gentle Giant Octopus UK version Vertigo original. And I sold that on eBay for him. I think it went for $200 or $300. And so he gave me a short stack of records to sell, and I cleaned them and looked them up, and I started learning about Vertigo and got a little taste of Gentle Giant and started to appreciate a little more wide variety. But anyway, fast forward. My point was when I started, so I hit about 2011, started going online and looking for a better turntable, heard about Project, started learning about Blake sleeves because the one YouTube channel he talked about Blake sleeves, and I started getting into Project, and I bought my first turntable from Project, which had really great sound quality. And then I stumbled across the vinyl community, and then all of that just kind of catapulted from there. So my original goal, and at that time, was to own everything on vinyl that I remembered from the past. So whether it was Johnny Horton, C.W. McCall, or it was all the 80s stuff that I remembered, whether it was all the 80s pop and then 80s metal, and then I wanted all of my 80s hard rock and heavy metal bands like Motley Crue, and then everything I ever listened to as a kid growing up, my formative years, I wanted it all on vinyl. And so that's what kind of catapulted me to get into Discogs and have a want list. I think it never really got too extreme for me where I had 30 records that I hadn't listened to. For me, it was wanting those grails, and with the resurgence of vinyl at that time, they were already out of reach. They were $40, $50, $80, $100, $150. So being able to snipe those. So let me go back to you and say, what was your original goal when you first started collecting?
Yeah, so mine's similar to yours. So the place I worked, and this is we're going to go mid-2000s, right around 04, 05, 06, somewhere around there. The place I worked, one of the purchasing guys who worked in the medical supply warehouse was a DJ back in the basically throughout the entire 1970s. But he was a DJ first in New York City and then down in Miami, Florida.
Oh wow!
Him and his wife they were empty nesters. His last kid had just gone off to college, and they were looking to move and downsize where they were currently at. And this is in Denver. And so one day he brought in boxes of records that he was going to let people come look through and then give away. And the reason he had them is he was going to take them to a shop and try and either sell them, or if they didn't want them, because at that time I don't think he really cared, right, one way or the other. He's like, I've got all this stuff on CD. He didn't think it was worth anything. And all these records were radio station promos that he had from being a DJ. So he brought them in, and I remember a couple people from the warehouse who were, stock, the stock guys from the warehouse would come in and take a look at them. And I think maybe a couple guys took a few, but he wasn't charging anybody. He was just like, take what you want. The rest I'm taking down to the local shop. So I went in there, and he sort of knew, because he was a music guy and we talked music all the time. And so he, sort of knew that I, had records and was interested in that. But he brought him in. I remember going to his office, and I just start looking through all these records, and I start pulling out Sticky Fingers and Beggar's Banquet and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, first two records. I think Damn the Torpedoes, Traveling Wilburys, Jethro Tull, you name it, Pink Floyd, all this classic rock stuff, to start pulling it out. And they all had the promo stamp, not for resale, because they were radio station copies. And I'm like, I can have these? And I think it was maybe 40 records that I ended up taking. And he had hundreds and hundreds. Looking back, I should have just taken all the boxes. But
all of them.
But I took, about 40 records probably. And he was saying, these are promo copies of radio station copies. These are, the first pressing, the first run. I didn't really understand what that meant, but I started thinking about it. okay, so what? So what's a promo copy, right? So they had it first. I didn't really think it was that big of a deal. So then, like you, I started trying to figure out how I could tell if this was a first pressing. And then I started seeing prices on eBay. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? Someone paid $150 for, first pressing Led Zeppelin or whatever it was. So that's when I started to, understand Run Out Groove and the matrix information and the numbers that are in the groove and what that meant. And then, a few years later, I discovered Discogs, and as a way to, archive your collection and keep it organized, and then learning about pressings, understanding the difference between the different pressings and how some, and depending on the record, some later pressings were not as good because, it had been pressed so many times that the stampers were no good anymore, just all that stuff. And then, I think I discovered YouTube. Right around the time that you started on YouTube. Was that 2011?
Yep.
Is when I just started discovering YouTube, because I would look things up just to see I literally just wanted to see what other people had. I was just watching people show their records. And at that time there was a small handful of people. I know you, I think maybe Rob from Boston was an early guy. Ben from Austria, I think his channel was Ryan Rocks. He's not on YouTube anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Was an early channel. That metal guy, was that guy? Lazarus.
He was one of the first videos I watched.
Yeah, he was, because his videos were great. They were super organized. They were well done. He was always in the same spot with his record collection right behind him.
Yeah.
And he would come in and go, guys, I just pulled a stack of records that I got from the thrift store, and they were like unopened Tori Amos records. And I'm just like, where is he finding this stuff? Like, my thrift stores have, like, Burt Bacharach and Herb Albert and Tijuana Brass and all this crap. That's
Noble Records is the guy now that's kind of doing that. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of early vinyl community, but there's a lot of good memories and a lot of good.
But that's how I kind of got to where I was today, and that's when I discovered that. And then, I just became invested on, like you said, upgrading my listening experience, because I had always had vintage stuff. I had a good turntable. I had my dad's old Techniques. At that point, I knew, all I needed was a new belt, and I started to learn about cartridges, and then I started to get into hi-fi stuff. And then I started to see that there's no way I'm going to spend $15,000 on a VPI turntable, but I can still get that kind of sound, in the $5,000 to $1,000 range. And so I started doing that, and then I became obsessed with vintage gear because it sounded so good. Still to this day, stuff that was 40, 50 years old. And I realized you could fix it up for not a whole lot of money. It was easy to work on. Right? A lot easier than new stuff. And so from that time on, I'd say probably 2011, 2012, 2013, I've been on a mission to build my system to improve my listening experience. And it's really never stopped since then.
Yeah, and I have a similar experience. I mean, that's awesome. It's an amazing journey. Everybody's journey is different. And you look at the record collection, and the records that you come across in your lifetime really speaks to the person that you are. Sorry, my phone buzzed. It really speaks to the person that you are, and also the things that you've come across. Not everybody's going to come across the same grails for a great bargain.
Right.
I think one of the biggest things that changed for me, like when I first started to collect, I wanted everything on vinyl, and like let's say Tool, for example. I would find out that, Tool hasn't released all of their albums on vinyl. So then I would buy like unofficial pressings or bootleg pressing. I didn't care. I just wanted it on vinyl. And now that I've let those go. I've traded those in and sold them, the ones that weren't official. Not only did I realize that I'm kind of taken away from the artist, and maybe they're even being passive aggressive. Like, look, if you guys are going to do that, we're not going to release these officially.
Right.
But with all those unofficial pressings, and it sounded so bad. And so that's one of the things that have changed is now I'm looking for things that sonically sound better, and the really poor recordings or really poor quality pressings I'm letting go of. So another example is Morphine. the pressing. There was a Morphine pressing that I actually let go of.
Morphine. That's a band I haven't thought of in a while.
You know Morphine? Yeah,
oh, yeah.
The 90s band. I think I have a poster. Yeah, it's actually in the frame here. But Morphine 90s band. The pressing wasn't very good because of the I guess what is it, the sibilance? The S's were really almost staticky, and so I find myself going through and paring down the collection and only wanting to keep like the better pressings. I'm not being ridiculous about it.
Right.
And then that's another thing that's changed, where the goal was ultimately to have a silently, perfectly silent playing record. Well, okay, that's the goal. I'm going to use my anti-static. I'm going to clean it. But if it has some pop and crackle, I don't care anymore. Another thing that changed, I used to go nuts if a corner was bent or if the record had some scuffs. Now I don't care. It shows up at the doorstep, a brand new record. It's the corners ding. You know what? I've let that go now. I don't really care anymore.
Yeah. To talk about like the sound quality of the records. I mean, I'd say still for me, a pop or a click here and there. You can have that in any kind of music, really, whether it's digital or analog. But for me, the sibilance, especially when you get like towards the run out groove, right, the inner grooves, if it's just so saturated with, I can't do it. Still to this day, I'll have to take I won't listen to it again. I can't do it. But yeah, I'd get a new record, right? And there'd be a tiny little ding on the corner, and I'd be like, if it was from Amazon, I was like, nope, I'm sending this back. Be a new one. And then I started to experience every single one they sent me had something else wrong with it on the jacket, right? Or the record sounded worse than the last one did. So it's like, you know what? Who cares? It's a little ding. It's going to get a ding on the corner just from sitting in my shelf for years. So you know what? I don't care. I'm doing this because I love music. Yes, I want really good sound, and I'm still going to clean my records and I have to do to take care of them. But a pop or click here and there, okay, it's not going to take away from the listening experience for me. But yeah, I was the same way with Grails too. My goal was to not necessarily collect every single record I ever, or every single piece of music on vinyl that I ever had as a kid. My goal was to basically replace every single CD that I owned. And I owned, at that time, probably thousands of CDs. I mean, everybody owns at least 300 CDs, anyone who was a music fan. Right?
I had a giant duffel bag, giant Nike double-decker Nike bag full of CDs, and that was my travel bag when I went to friends' houses.
Oh yeah, just dump all your CDs in there. I had like 5 big Tupperware bins. I still have all my CDs that are sitting in storage. But that was my goal, was to replace every one on vinyl. And I don't know if I've achieved that goal because I stopped comparing. I stopped checking off the checklist. And then it kind of turned into, okay, I want to make sure I have all of my favorite artists, genres of music. It was always metal and hard rock. I got to make sure I have all of their records on vinyl. Problem was 90s records, as you just stated, not everything was pressed on vinyl, especially in the US, and some of the stuff was only available in, Brazil or Greece or the UK. And you end up spending.
Why are all the records in Greece? I mean, if you look at it on Discogs right now,
they loved their vinyl apparently.
I mean, obviously they had the record pressing plants, and they hung on to them. Obviously they weren't being pressed in the United States anymore. But it seems like every time I want a record, it's in Greece. Netherlands.
Oh yeah, some of those Sabbath.
So like, if I ever go over there, yeah.
So kind of like you, I wanted to make sure I got everything. And like I said, I don't know if I have everything. I have a lot of stuff that I was able to get. But I got rid of I don't have any bootlegs that are in my collection anymore. I mean, I think I have 4 or 5 My Bloody Valentine Loveless bootlegs because an original pressing was so much. And finally,
finally reissued that.
But
even that's hard to get a hold of because it's only direct through their label.
Yeah, but it was only $20. I bought both that one and I bought the album before, Isn't Anything. I bought for $20 right when they came. I pre-ordered them. Now they're out of print again.
I mean, even then it was direct to the distributor, and it was, 30 pounds plus shipping. So
yep, it was $20,
that's a great
and then I
one to have.
paid the shipping. Yep, and now they're a couple $100.
Another thing too that's changed. Let's just take this year for example. So Flotsam and Jetsam came out with a new album, and I like it. It's a good album. I think there's been some raving reviews on the vinyl community about it, but I don't love it enough to buy it on vinyl this year. I have no plans to add that Plots album on vinyl. I don't feel like I need it. I'd like to pick up the CD. Right now I'm good with the digital copy through Amazon. I like to listen to it, but I don't need that on vinyl. But now you take Death Angel. About a year or two ago, I got on the quest to complete the discography.
Right.
Anything on vinyl, I want it all, whether it's a reissue or original, that's okay. And I'm there. I've got the complete discography. So when the new one came out, I was all over it. And I guess it just depends on the artist and trying to find a good balance. Another thing I do over the last year and a half or 2 years, and I credit Dixieland Farm, Chris, for this. He gave us a challenge. I know I've said this before. He gave us a challenge to stop buying records and try out different equipment, invest in equipment. And then I looked around and I realized, I had my project player, but it's getting some years on it. I've got a vintage receiver, but it, it's my dad's. And I was like, well, I need to start focusing on equipment. I'm raking in all these records. I'm buying everything that's coming out. I was like, I really need to start looking at getting some different equipment. And I've never been more happy with my system and being able to, some fortunate things that I came across with my wife's uncle. He moved and he had a bunch of hi-fi stuff. I had another friend let me sell some of his vintage equipment. So I was able to start listening to Klipsch, Hershey's. I had a set of those. And I'm sitting there cleaning some electronics, going through cleaning a turntable or a receiver. I had the Hershey's playing, Pink Floyd Division Bell. And I'm sitting there cleaning, and all of a sudden something just hit me. Something hit me out of nowhere, like this emotional reaction to the music. And I kind of looked up. I was like, what was that? I was like, that's the thing we're always looking for when we listen to music. It caught me off guard. I'm like, it's these Hershey's. These speakers are amazing. And so, yeah. And I was like, oh, my gosh. And so, unfortunately, I had to sell those because I was splitting the money with my wife's uncle. But the person I sold it to was like, oh, man, I had a pair of these when I was in high school. I've been trying to find a pair, but they're too expensive. And I sold them, I sold them on eBay for a pretty good deal. But that got me on the quest. So I'm trying different electronics, and then now, I have the Pioneer receiver. I had my friend Dave. I had a 1080 with the SX 1080. So being able to try the different components and upgrading a turntable, and I was trying not to say the word upgrade, getting a different, because it may not be an upgrade. Trying different turntables, different speakers. My listening experience right now is at a peak. I'm at the peak of enjoying my collection, enjoying the electronics that I have and the playback. That's what it's about. The other thing that changed for me is being able, and being able to sit down and listen to a whole record, both sides, with little to no multitasking.
Yeah.
And that's been huge. Yep. It's been a great way to decompress, and you start to listen to the record, you want to reach for that phone, you want to reach for the magazine or book, but then you just sit back and the thoughts start to drift. You get crazy thoughts. You think about work, life, things you got to do. Eventually, after about the third track, guess what? All that evaporates for me. And that's where I hit that. Yeah, that's where I hit that moment. That's why I do this. That's why I buy these records and put too much money into things to play the records on.
Right. No, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. It's almost like before, when I had a kind of a modest setup and I was just, trying to collect as many records as possible. I didn't really necessarily look forward to it. I did. I loved it. But now when if I'm on traveling for work or I'm on a road trip for work and I'm coming back, the first thing I'm thinking of after seeing my family, of course, is I can't wait to go downstairs and flip that stereo on, and I'm going to listen to X, Y, and Z.
Right.
I'm not going to do anything. The only multitasking I'm doing is reading the jacket or the liner notes, right? And I'll sit in my chair and I'll position it where I do every single time. And I'm outside of speakers. I'm happy with my setup. I will be happy here probably a month, it seems like, once I get my new speakers that I ordered. But I won't need to upgrade. I'll probably will not need to upgrade my turntables ever again. Honestly, if I upgrade anything, it's going to be cartridges, maybe a receiver. I mean, the receiver I have is arguably the biggest, baddest receiver of the 1970s ever made. Not that that means anything, right? Some people might think it's terrible, right? It's subjective. So, but yeah, I'm at a point where I'm satisfied. I'm happy with my setup, and that's the whole point, right? I'm not obsessed with something that doesn't exist, right? Obsessed with reaching or having or acquiring stuff just because I read an article or somebody else told me that this is the best thing you're ever going to have, right? It's not an obsession anymore. It's a hobby.
Yeah, exactly. And I started to think back when I was first in the vinyl community, and I did have the project, but even then, nobody ever gave me a hard time or looked down their nose. I think there was maybe one or two people, but for the most part, everybody welcomed me into the community, and the people that I talked to, whether it was at the record stores or friends that I was meeting that was into the same thing, never really made fun of my setup. They never gave me a hard time about it. And as I discover and learn new vocabulary and start to get into cartridges and, vertical tracking alignment and Class D, Class A, and you start to learn on those, you start to learn about all of those things. And I feel like I got an in-game system here. I mean, thanks to you and your gift with the Pioneer receiver. Again, thank you for that. And then the Marantz turntable and the speakers. I'm at an in-game point for now. If I come across some money, but I balance buying records and equipment. I'm at an in-game unless I win a lottery or something like that. But right. I never noticed anybody really laughing at me or making fun of me for the type of equipment that I was listening to music on. Or they were allowing me to grow and learn and take my steps along the way. Yeah, and I challenged myself to do the same thing. Yeah,
this is starting.
Because if we're going to bring new people into this, we got to be the same way. I can't. If someone has a Crosley record player, which is like the Justin Bieber, for some reason we're allowed to make fun of that. But if somebody has a Crosley, I'm not going to kick them around for that. I'm not going to say, oh, well, you got to ditch that thing. There's a guy at work, our quality manager at work. He's recently getting into vinyl. And I'm like, oh, really? You're talking to the right guy. And then I'm slowly easing him into it. Or I'm not just unloading and puking up a bunch of stuff on him, a bunch of unnecessary knowledge, or I have this and I have that. We're having good conversations about music, the music he likes. I gave him a couple records that blew his mind, and he's got a couple Bluetooth speakers. He has a turntable with a couple Bluetooth speakers, and that's not the way I listen to music. But I'm like, oh, you got to ditch that and get a Class D Pioneer. And I'm not going to be that way. Nobody was that way to me. It's not the person I am. But I think all of us watching, or like vinyl community people, we've got to bring people into the fold, and we've got to be humble about it, maintain a humble attitude, because there's a lot of people when it comes to, on the forums out there, there are a lot of snobs. They look down their nose at anything that's less than what they have. And I just think it's a wrong attitude, a wrong approach. And I think it turns a lot of people away from this
hobby. It does. Absolutely. 100% agree. I'm not going to lie and say that I've never had that thought when I see a Crosley. I mean,
right.
I'm not going to lie, but you know what? I've never walked up to somebody or, responded to someone's YouTube video who was, showing a record playing on a crappy record player. I've never said, oh, you're not worth, being in, you don't have the expertise that I have to be a real record. I've never been like that at all. In fact, if you are kind of have a nurturing attitude about it, then they're going to start. Everybody starts somewhere, but then that they can get better, right? But you don't want to come right out and say, you know what, you need to ditch that. You need to do this, this, and this, right? You meet them where they're at. I have perfect example, a guy that I still work with to this day. He is a record guy. He started collecting after he came over to the house one time just to hang out. I had him over and he saw my collection and we were listening and he's like, oh, awesome. So he went out, got a Crosley, and he had an old like Gerard boombox type setup that he had from when he was a kid, but it had a phono, right? So he could plug his Crosley into it.
That sounds like a cool boombox.
Yeah, it did not sound good, but I didn't say anything about it. It was just him getting into it. He was focusing his time on getting records, right? Building his collection, really investing in the music. And then one day he came up to me and he's like, man, we were hanging out at your house a couple weeks ago. I was listening to your setup that I had at the time. And he's like, I just got kind of sad because mine doesn't sound like that. So can you help me? I want to get something different. Can you help me? I'm like, absolutely. He's like, what would you recommend first? And I said, well, first of all, we need to get you a different turntable. That would be my recommendation. He's like, well, here's my budget. I've got $200. I was like, perfect. It's like, we're going to go into this vintage place, this vintage store. There's a place here that sells vintage stereo equipment. They specialize in it. And we're going to get you a Technics turntable from the late 70s, early 80s. We can get it for 100 and whatever it was, $30. And it comes with a quality cartridge. I knew the exact one, walked in there, he bought it, had it for maybe a month. And then he's like, love it, it's awesome. I already noticed a difference, but I need to get a better stereo. I'm plugging in through this,
exactly.
Boombox from the mid 90s. What do you recommend? I was like, well, you know what, man, I've got an extra vintage receiver. It was like a Pioneer SX 650 that I'm just sitting around collecting dust. So you can have this, man. I don't have any extra speakers, but we can find you some inexpensive speakers. So that's kind of what he did. And so he started small, right? Did what he could. And then one day, not by me telling him he needed to do this, this, and this, he got to there on his own. So I really think if people are going to stick with it, right? If they start with a Crosley, if they stick with it for any length of time, they will eventually upgrade their sound, right? They'll want a better listening experience. But they won't if you're right. If you have people, like us, people who are longtime collectors or people in vinyl community snobs who, want to tell you that everything you're doing is wrong and that you shouldn't even be collecting. You're ruining your records. You're wasting your time.
Right.
That's not for us to say, man. Let them do what they're going to do. They'll get there. Just let them go through that process.
And you could see where I absolutely agree. And I think that's awesome that you can kind of be a mentor to someone like that. And that's where we get a satisfaction was when we bring somebody in and up to speed like that. I love that. Yeah. Right now I'm thinking about my wife's cousin, and he asked me, how much did you pay for your speakers? When I told him, he's like, oh man, I don't know if I can do that. But he's got a 2014 Jeep Cherokee SRT, and it's I don't know, it's got 600 horsepower or whatever, 500 horsepower. It's ridiculous, but it's an awesome vehicle. But that's where he puts his time and his priority. Yeah. And now if you go look at my driveway right now, my 1998 Dodge Dakota, it's got the clear coats coming off of it, and you can just see where my priority is. I get more enjoyment out of listening to music where he enjoys being able to have that horsepower and have a high performance vehicle. I'd love to have both, but you got to balance what you love. And I just think that's just evident that music is my passion, and enhancing the listening experience is there. Maybe one day, I'll get a new car, but it's not going to be like that because I want to invest more into the music experience. Yeah. So you can see what people's priorities are,
Absolutely. Well, I think we can maybe move to a closing topic if you want. I think we kind of got a good idea of kind of where we both came from. And for you folks that will eventually, hopefully, watch this, comment. We want to hear kind of where you got your start, or make a video, right? Make a response video to this
video response
podcast, and just kind of, tell us where you started. I mean, I felt like I know a lot of people in the vinyl community over the past few years since I officially announced that I'm in the vinyl community. But I don't really know a whole lot about everybody, kind of where they got their start. And I like that. I want to know. So let's, I want to show 2 records that I've been listening to. And then I figure maybe you can show 2 records that you have been recently listening to that you maybe would recommend for somebody. So I'll let you go first if you have anything in mind.
I do have one. I don't have two.
Okay.
But I can certainly talk about
That's good.
some. Yeah, it's a good idea to probably switch gears a little bit and wrap this up. But I grabbed the record really quick, so I'm going to have to kind of do this on the fly. All right, what do I got here? So this is Angelus Apedrida. I'm saying that a little bit funny. Sorry about that. This is a thrash metal band from Spain. I don't know if you've heard of these guys or not yet. Oh, something fell out. I think it's this CD. These guys are killer. Thrash metal band. These are one of the modern day torch bearers, so to speak, when we did our thrash history.
Yeah.
They formed in about 2000. I think they have 6 albums out between 2002 or 3, and then this came out in 2018. It is killer. The name of the album, I'm not going to say that, but it means sharpening the guillotine. It's just killer. You can tell that they're influenced. And the title of the band, or the band name, stands for Renegades, or Stateless Angels is what that stands for. I looked it up. But a really cool artwork from the same artist that's done some Destruction albums, but really great thrash, melodic, kind of a blend of different influences that we're familiar with. But probably one of my top 10 thrash albums from 2018. So check these guys out if you get a chance. And that's all I really had to show.
Okay, well, you know what? We'll just keep it at 1 then. So for me, I'm going to switch and go on my other love of music. Everybody knows I'm a metalhead, but everybody also knows I'm a jazz guy too. So, and because I've been traveling so much, I haven't been able to get into a whole lot of different records. I've had very limited time, but the time I have had, I've been primarily listening to the Blue Note Tone Poet releases that have come out. I know you jazz guys out there have watched a number of videos on them. So this is my favorite. And this is one of the latest releases that came out last
Friday.
Yeah. So this is Kenny Burrell, obviously. He's one of the legends of jazz guitar, along with guys like Wes Montgomery. Kenny Burrell, Wes Montgomery are 2 of my biggest influences on the jazz side from, the early days. Highly recommended. If you're a jazz guy and maybe you're not into necessarily jazz guitar and you don't know where to start, this is a good one to start with. The album is just called Introducing Kenny Burrell. So, and this is his first Blue Note record. So amazing. Sound quality is amazing. These Tone Poet releases are phenomenal. I love them. I'm going to get them all because I've loved every single one of them, even the newer ones. So
high quality, absolute high quality. Yeah. When did that album come out originally? When did that Kenny Burrell come out? Was it 68? Was it late 60s?
No, this is late 50s. It was released in 56. 1956.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And then revisiting some of these lesser known artists has been quite an education with the Tone Poets. Some of them I'm familiar with and some of them I'm listening to. I hate to admit it, but listening to these guys for the first time.
But
the Tone Poets introduced Freddie Hubbard. I was listening to Freddie Hubbard, Open Sesame this morning. I don't think it's a Tone Poet. That's the 80th anniversary, but outstanding. Just amazing production and just great classic stuff. All that stuff from the 50s to 60s, just jazz standards, fantastic.
Yeah, and I like what they've done too. Even the Blue Note 80th anniversary with the Tone Poets and the 80th anniversary, they've picked records that have either not been reissued or they haven't been reissued for a very, very long time. They're off the beaten path. Of course, I've heard of Kenny Burrell, but I was not familiar with this album. So
Midnight Blue is the one that comes to mind for me.
That's his classic for sure. I think there's a really good Analog Productions pressing of Midnight Blue, if you ever want to seek that one out. But I'm really, really happy that Blue Note decided to kind of pick records that maybe haven't been thought about for a long time for both their 80th anniversary and their Tone Poet series. So
it's been a great year for jazz on vinyl.
Really has. I feel like I've learned even more about jazz than I knew before, as far as artists and albums that I just I had not crossed my path. And I've been listening to jazz since the late 90s, since I got into college. So, and there's just, that's the great thing about music though, right? Is it's just a lifetime's worth of discovering to do. Even if you think you know it all, you don't. There's always more to discover.
Absolutely.
Cool.
I would love to get my hands, you're talking about jazz, I'd love to be able to see, I don't want to make this run on any longer, but I'd love to be able to see the Blue Note documentary that's recently released. I don't know how to get my hands on that yet, but I would definitely be looking forward to it when it hits mainstream.
Is it on Amazon?
I don't know if it's in September or what.
Is it not out yet?
If it's now, I think if it is, I'll be surprised, but I'll definitely be watching it tonight. But I thought it was going to be on DVD maybe in September, but really looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. I love jazz documentaries. I always felt like I wish metal documentaries would go in depth like jazz documentaries do, right? In my mind, we've had maybe 2 metal documentaries where I felt like, okay, I'm somewhat satisfied. You scratched my itch pretty well. And that was, of course, the Sam Dunn stuff. And then maybe that thrash metal Get Thrashed documentary that came out.
That was pretty... oh man, that one was kind of rough. That latter one.
Get Thrashed.
Get Thrashed, and there's some out there, but at least there's something out there. When I think about documentaries and thrash, the Death, that was pretty good.
I still haven't watched it. I own it.
Not the punk band, but the metal band from Florida, right?
So it was really good.
The punk band is a really good documentary too, but we're talking about metal here.
Yeah.
They're few and far between, but. Yeah, I wish there was more. That's for sure. There's always Metal Obsession, the documentary that we did with the vinyl community. It's pretty dated now, but I thought that was one of my favorites. But we're definitely lacking in that area. I don't know why. If there's no production, if maybe there's no audience for it, if they feel like they can't catch. I think it's dry overall with documentaries. If you look at a lot of the stuff on Amazon Prime, a lot of it's hacked. I mean, it's just the artists deserve better than that.
Absolutely. I wish that Sam.
I get caught up.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Sam Dunn. I love his stuff. The Metal Evolution. It was really great stuff.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I wish Sam Dunn would do more Metal Evolution. I love. How many times I've watched each episode of Metal Evolution over and over and over and over again because I thought they were so good, but I want more. He needs to go deeper, I feel like. There was a lot of artists that didn't get talked about much. He may be a quick mention that I felt like he could have gotten, deeper into. Obviously, he was doing it for VH1 Classic at the time, so he's only got a limited time and a limited budget. But I wish there was more stuff like that, is what I'm saying.
Absolutely. There's got to be an audience for it. All of those 40-year-old guys, and then you got the kids coming into the scene now. The new wave of thrash, is out there. It's got to be an audience for it. But anyway, have we thought of a title yet for this?
My first time. I don't know.
Don't buy a Crosley.
Don't buy a Crosley. You're stupid if you have one. No.
My first time.
That sounds kind of weird. No.
Yeah, we'll come up with something. What are we going to talk about next time?
So next episode for Vodcast Underground, episode 3, I figured we would talk about the term and the topic heavy metal. I know that's a loaded term and a loaded topic, but what is considered metal now today as we sit here what was considered metal back in the 1970s is not considered metal today. In fact, if something doesn't have drop tuning and guttural vocals, especially for a newer metalhead, a young kid, it's not metal to them, right? Whereas to me, I believe personally that there's all different kinds of metal, whether you have clean singing or guttural singing or whatever. I don't think that necessarily matters. But I figured that is a term that we can discuss kind of our thoughts and then maybe move through a quick timeline. And then, of course, I know all the folks in the vinyl community, all the metalheads out there, have their opinions as well. So look for that in episode 3.
Awesome. Well, I'll sign off. Thanks, guys, for watching. Appreciate your comments below, and we'll be back soon to talk about more heavy metal. So keep listening to music.
See you, everybody. Thanks.